Dasi Dikshurane Dikpati Kamaniya. Dasi Dikshurane Dikpati Kamaniya. Asamukha Moli Balim Amaniya. Asamukha Moli Balim Amaniya. Dasi Dikshurane Dikpati Kamaniya. Dasi Dikshurane Dikpati Kamaniya. Asamukha Moli Balim Amaniya. Asamukha Moli Balim Amaniya. Keshavadvita Rama Sharira. Keshavadvita Rama Sharira. Keshavadvita Rama Sharira. Keshavadvita Rama Sharira. Jai Jagadish Hare. 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 Jai Jagadish Hare.
Dashamukha Mauli Baliramaniya. Dashamukha Mauli Baliramaniya. Keshavadvita Rama Sharira. Keshavadvita Rama Sharira. Jaya Jagadish Hare. Keshava Jaya Jagadish Hare.
Vitarasi Diksurane Dikpati Kamaniyam Dasamukha Mauli Baling Ramani. The next avatar is Ramchandra. So the Ravan, who had 10 heads, he challenged the Lord, and Lord Ramchandra took up the challenge and killed him.
Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Bacharani Nivasesa Sinivadi Paskatyade Satarani. Mantrihopatu Bastaki Pasnavi Batapti Tanam Pavani Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Prabhu, I know you mentioned it at the beginning, but what's the timing again?
Till 8 a.m., but if questions go over anything, you're welcome to go over.
Okay. So Valmiki Muni was originally a criminal who, when his family members refused to also accept the karma for his criminality, decided to become renounced. And he was advised to chant Rama, which he was not able to do. So he chanted instead Mara and became purified by that, and actually saw all the pastimes of the Ramayana. So we're not going to tell every detail of the story in the time that we have, but we can start with King Dasarath, who had no sons. And this is a recurring theme in the Shastra, the kings who are in anxiety because they have no sons. And it's not just that everybody's into children, but that part of the responsibility when you have a responsible administrative post is to make sure that there's succession. And if you're doing some important service for the Lord that needs to keep being done, we have some services that whether they're done or not, it doesn't really matter. But other services are important that they keep going. So you have to have some succession. And generally in the ruling, it was a child that you trained from birth in how to rule. So he didn't have any sons, and therefore the sage Rishi Shringa, that's a long story, came to Ayodhya and performed a yajna. Today, when people can't have children, they go to the fertility clinic. So this was the subtle Vedic arts of a fertility clinic to have a good child. And each of Dasarath's 3 queens took this payasa from the yagya, and Kausalya gave birth to Ram, Kaikeyi to Bharat, and Sumitra to the twins Lakshmana and Shatrughna. And Dasarath was very happy with these 4 sons, which are considered expansions of Vasudeva, Sankarshan, Pradyumna, and Aniruddha, or sometimes Vasudeva and the Kanksh and the disc and Seshanaga, as described in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And Ram, of course, was the darling of his mother Kausalya and also of Sumitra and Kaikeyi. They had a very congenial family life where the mothers considered their stepsons as good as their sons. And everybody was very friendly with one another and very supportive of one another. Today, polygamy is not so common in the world. Obviously, there are hundreds of thousands of people who practice it, but it's not so common. Whereas divorce and remarriage is very common. And we sometimes see among divorce and remarriage that the divorced and remarried couples are still friendly with one another and they raise the children together and things like that. So we saw this in the household of Dasarath, and that there was this loving relationship among all of the family members. And the 4 boys were trained as Kshatriyas from the beginning of life. Again, this is one of the reasons why a responsible king like Dasarath wanted to have sons, and not only sons, but good sons, so that they could be trained from a young age. You know, nowadays our political leaders, many times they're not even trained in political leadership. You know, we had an American president years ago who was a Hollywood actor, you know. They're not trained, or, you know, business person or something like that. Whereas in a sane society, one has children according to a particular mentality. One can call a particular mentality of child through a Garbhadan Samskar, and then one trains them in their responsible duties from a very young age. So when the brothers got to be 16, the king Dasarath was visited by Vishwamrita Muni. Vishwamrita Muni has a very interesting history, which we don't have time to tell the whole history, but he was born a Kshatriya, and out of envy at Vishwamrita decided to become a Brahmana so he could compete with Vishwamrita. But even though his original mood was envy, he did become a Brahmana. And not only did he become a Brahmana, he became a Maharishi and a Brahmarishi. And not only that, he became a pure devotee. And his role in Ram Lila, Krishna Lila, and Chaitanya Lila is as a matchmaker. So Vishwamrita Muni comes to see Dasarath and says, I'm having a yagya. These demons, Marich and Subahu, are disturbing the yagya, but I could kill them with my Brahmana powers, but because I've taken a vow of nonviolence, I cannot do so. Anyway, he says, it's not the business of the Brahmana to kill the opposing elements. That's the business of the Kshatriya. And so Dasarath says, yes, whatever you want. And then Vishwamrita says, well, give me your sons Ram and Lakshman, who are only 16. And Dasarath was like, I can't give you my sons. They're very young. What will they do against these demons? And then Vasistha says, no, you send them. Vishwamrita will protect them. And on the way, they stopped by at the hermitage where Ahalya had been cursed by her husband to become a stone. Because she had been unfaithful to her husband, Gautama Rishi. And by the touch of Ram's lotus feet, she was restored to her original, to her form as Gautama Rishi's wife, and she was reunited with her husband. A very nice indication that by the grace of the Lord, even if we've performed some sort of sin or we've performed our actions have been irregular, we can be released. That doesn't mean we should intentionally do sinful things thinking that Krishna will release me, but it does mean that Krishna's mercy can release us from any kind of sin. So then Vishwamrita gave Ram and Lakshman some weapons, which is interesting because, of course, they are the origin of all weapons. Similar things happen with Krishna Lila. And then Vishwamrita told them first to kill Tadika, which is interesting that the first demon that Ram kills is a woman. which reminds us, of course, of Krishna's Leela. The first demon he kills is a woman. And generally, in Vedic society, women were not executed. But Ram said because it was the order of Vishwamitra, he did so. And then Ram and Lakshman protected the yajna from Subahu. They killed Subahu, and they sent Maricha, they punished Marichi, and they sent Maricha, and they sent him at a distance. So Maricha had some experience of the power of Ramachandra, which will be very important later on in this story. And then Vishwamitra says, I'd like to bring you to Matala. There's a Swayamvar for the princess Sita. So we say Vishwamrita's primary, he has a parental rasa with the Lord, and his primary service is as a matchmaker. So Sita, when she was a child, had moved the bow of Lord Shiva. And because of that, her father, actually her adopted father, said that anyone who could string the bow could marry her. And so many kings and princes tried and failed. They couldn't even lift the bow. It took hundreds of men just to move the bow, even on a wheeled cart. And Ram picks up the bow with his left hand, then easily strings it. And in the process of stringing it, he breaks the bow. And then Sita garlands him as her husband. Now, Sita has a sister, Urmila, and she has 2 cousins. And so it was decided that the 2 sisters and 2 cousin sisters would marry the 4 sons of Dasarath.
The woman called to their friends, "Come, come, come see this beautiful exchange. Look at the beautiful Sita. See the handsome Ram."
So all 4 brothers married the 4 sisters, cousins, in one wonderful ceremony. Dasarath and his retinue came to Mithila. Now, of course, they are married eternally. Ram and Sita, Lakshman, Urmila, etc., Bharat, Mandavi, Shatrughna, Vashrutakirti. They're married, they're eternally married. These are the Lord and Lakshmi. But yet, weddings are fun. Huh? So the Lord, they're eternally married, and then they're eternally having this pastime of having a wedding. And this is, it's not like in this world, of course, weddings are often simply stress for people. They just like to get the photographs, but the actual event may be very stressful leading up to the event and so forth. But for the Lord, this is all loving. And after the wedding, when they're returning back to Ayodhya, Ram is confronted by Parasuram. And Parasuram challenges Ram. And the Kshatriyas were not so favorable to Parasuram because he killed Kshatriyas so many times, 21 generations of Kshatriyas. But Ram defeated Parashuram. Of course, Parashuram is also an avatar of the Lord. And basically, this particular pastime was to show that Parashuram could desist from his mission on earth, and that now the prevailing avatar was Ramachandra. And Sita and Ram became very, very happy in Ayodhya, where they lived for some time, the 4 brothers living with their wives. And then one day, Dasarath noticed, as we all do, that he had become old. And again, the main reasons for having sons was for succession. So he saw, I'm becoming old. It's time to renounce. So we see in modern monarchy, just like recently in the UK, Philip, I think his name is, the consort to the Queen, just died at the age of 99. And the Queen is also very elderly. But she's, the idea is that she's going to become queen until her death, or I suppose, unless she became completely disabled. But the Vedic civilization wasn't like that. The Vedic civilization was, as soon as you have a qualified person to take over and you are old, then you get out of the way. So this particular system allowed for young people who were like, 20 to 50 years of age, or even 15, maybe to 60, whatever, but young people to be doing the main moving and shaking in the world, which is what they want to do. When you're young, you want to fix the world, you want to do this, and you want to do that. So it allows them to do that, allows them to take that youthful energy and run the world. And it also allows older people to concentrate on spirituality, that once that, I want to run the world energy has dissipated, which it does somewhere around 50 or 60. You're just like, yeah, I don't really know if I want to run the world, change the world, and do this and that. So when that energy dissipates, somebody needs to be muted. When that energy dissipates, then you can retire and you have somebody else who's able to run the world. So this is the Vedic system. The Vedic system is not that people in their 60s and 70s are managers and taking, posts of responsibility and management. That is not the Vedic system. The Vedic system is by age 50, certainly by age 60, you've retired. Again, as soon as there's somebody, even if you're younger than that, as soon as there's someone responsible. So Dasarath sees, I'm getting old and my sons are well situated, they're highly qualified. And now I can just focus on my spiritual life. This is, of course, part of the reason of the brahmacharya training before marriage, that, you want to marry, you want to have children, you want to have money, you want to have a career. But then this training in childhood, you go back to this and say, the real purpose is just to focus on my spiritual life. Of course, even as a young person, as a grihasta, one can be fully Krishna conscious. But one is spiritualizing one's household, one is spiritualizing one's career, but then one retires and just engages in the angas of bhakti. So Dasarath felt some urgency. He felt, I need to do this right away. I need to install Ram as the king right away. And, often urgency gets us into trouble. Often when we feel, I have to do this right away, I have to fix this right away, I have to take care of this right away, we may not consider everything very carefully. So at this particular time, when Dasarath felt some urgency, Bharat and Shatrughna were out visiting Kaikeyi's family, their maternal family, and just Ram and Lakshman were there in the kingdom. So Manthara, the servant of Kaikeyi, she was kind of a conspiracy theorist person. And so when she saw that Dasarath was going to install Ram as the king, while her queen's son was out of town, she immediately ascribed ill motives to Dasarath. So this sort of mentality where one thinks that the actions of others are all ill motivated, it's quite common. We know when we're the victim of that, when somebody thinks that we have ill motives when we don't, how painful that is. It's like, that wasn't my intention, right? And still, it's so tempting to ascribe ill motives to others. This is what Manthara did. She decided that Dasarath was in this urgency because he wanted to disinherit Bharat and Shatrughna, which would thus disinherit Kaikeyi. And so she created dissension within what had been a very happy and cooperative and loving family. And this is, in the Bible, one of the 7 deadly sins is to sow disharmony among brothers. We find with the 10 prachetas, when they served the Lord in love, Lord Vishnu was very happy with them. So the Lord's happy when we cooperate. And one of the worst things to do is to sow dissension between people who are happily cooperating. And, people do this in the name of truth and justice, and which was what Manthara was doing. She thought that she was helping Kaikeyi. Anyway, Kaikeyi became influenced by this Manthara. She became influenced, and she used an old benediction to ask Dasarath to install Bharat instead of Ram and to banish Ram for 14 years. So Sita, as a chaste wife, she said, I will come with you. I'm a wife for better or worse, richer or poorer, sickness and health. And if you're banished, then I should also be banished. And Lakshman said, I will also come with you. And so they went as ascetics, putting on bark clothing and taking blessings from Kausalya. And everyone in Ayodhya wanted to go with them. The people of Ayodhya were on the side of Ram, but Ram didn't want that to happen. And so he tricked them and he left them at the side of the river where they couldn't see the tracks of his chariot cross the river in the early morning. When they woke up, Ram was simply gone. So Krishna sometimes does that, right? When there's something we want to do that he knows is not good for us, he may trick us into doing the right thing. So then in the forest, they meet Guha, who's a tribal chief. And here we really start having how Ram Lila very much involves lower class people, materially speaking, and animals. So here's this tribal, he's a great devotee. And at this point, Ram and Lakshman mat their hair and they say, well, we can't even stay, Guha, in your village because we're supposed to be exiled. And Guha arranges for them to take a boat there for you, because he said you could stay in my village, but he arranges them to take a boat across the Ganga, and he arranges for them to go to a very nice place, a Chitrakoot, where they could stay for their exile. So they were just going to live in the forests and spend their 14 years of exile peacefully at Chitrakoot. But on the way, they meet with many sages who are living in the forest. And the sages tell them that Rakshasas or cannibals are attacking them. And so Ram says, I will protect you. And it is this vow that Ram takes to protect the sages that really starts to get everybody in trouble. And in fact, Sita says to him, why have you vowed to protect the sages when you're here as a renunciate? You're not here as the king. Bharat is the king. And Ram says, well, I'm not really a renunciate. I'm still in the Grahastha ashram. So I'm still a Kshatriya. I'm here to do austerities. And he said, anyway, I already gave my promise. So Dasarath was so heartbroken at Ram's exile that he gave up his body. And there's a whole story, which we don't have time to tell, of how Dasarath remembered that when he was young, he'd accidentally killed a young Brahmana boy, and he was cursed to die in separation from his son. Of course, it was very interesting, Dasarath dying in separation from Ram. This is the highest benediction. And Dasarath had, because of Kaikeyi's actions, he had a lot of detachment from his kingdom and from his family. So he died with detachment towards his family and in separation from Ram. So meanwhile, Bharata returns, finds out that Dasarath has died, finds out about the machinations of his mother. And so he goes to the forest to try to get Ram to again be the king. And Ram refuses. He says, you know, our father's promise to Kaikeyi was that I would be exiled and you would be the king. And Bharat says, but I'm not going to accept that. And finally, they make an agreement that Ram would be the official king and Bharat would rule as his representative. And he took Ram's shoes and he said, I will put the shoes on the throne and I will rule as your representative. And Bharat, when he returned, decided that as Ram's representative, he would also be performing austerities. He wouldn't live in the palace. He would just drink barley cooked in the urine of a cow. And he would leave Ram's shoes on the throne in splendor, and he himself would live more austerely than Ram in the forest. So now Ram's vow to protect the sages involves the killing of Virad, a great demon who he and his brother were attacking and eating sages. And then he becomes involved with Shurpanaka. So Shurpanaka is the sister of Ravana, a hideous demon, and she has lust for Ramchandra, and she proposes to Ram that he should marry her. When he refuses and Lakshman refuses, then she goes to attack Sita, after which Lakshman cuts off her nose. She then goes to her other brothers, Kar and Dushan, and she says, I've been insulted by Ram and Lakshman. I mean, of course, the real truth was that she insulted them, but she tells her story as the victim. And so Kara and Dushana take 14,000 Rakshasas to attack Ram and Kara and Dushana again with 3 Siras. And these 14,000 Rakshasas attack, but Ram asks Lakshman to protect Sita, and single-handedly he kills them and 14,000 Rakshasas. One of them survives, as well as Shurpanaka, and they go to Ravana and tell him that Ram has killed this whole contingent of Rakshasas. Also, Shurpanaka lies and says she was trying to kidnap Sita for Ravana, and she was disfigured trying to serve Ravana, and she incites Ravana's lust towards Sita. Ravana had a huge harem of women, many of whom were other men's wives that he had kidnapped. And because Ravana was very powerful and very rich, very intelligent and very learned, these women felt honored to be with him. So he thought Sita would be like this too. He thought Sita's husband has been exiled, and I need to teach Ram a lesson for disfiguring my sister. So he decided he was going to kidnap Sita. So he goes to his friend Maricha, and he says, please take the form of a golden deer, bewilder Sita, and then while her husband and brother-in-law are away, I'll kidnap her. Now, Maricha had been punished by Ram at the yagya of Vishwamrita, so he knew the power of Ram, and he said, don't do this. This is a really bad idea. And Ravana said, if you will not cooperate, I will kill you. And Maricha decided, looks like I'm going to die. Better to be killed by Ram than by Ravana. He thought better to die killed by an enemy than to be executed by one's king. Of course, on a spiritual level, it's certainly better to be killed by Ram. So then Maricha took the form of a golden deer, and Sita fell in love with this deer and asked Ram and Lakshman to go get the deer. So Ram goes to get the deer, who then assumes his original form and calls out, Ram. Right? Calls out, Lakshman, Sita, help. Lakshman, Sita, help. And Lakshman also goes at Sita's entreaty, which leaves Sita alone. And Ravana pretends to be a sage. So if you really want to be a good criminal, you dress up as a police officer. So Ravana pretends to be a sage and kidnaps Sita. Now, there was an old friend of Dasarath who was a vulture. And this vulture had told Ram and Lakshman there, but this time they had, by the way, moved to Panchavati. They weren't in Chitrakoot anymore. So this vulture had told Ram and Lakshman that he would protect them. And when he sees Ravana kidnapping Sita, he goes to fight against Ravana. And I remember watching the play of the Ramayana in the same room as Srila Prabhupada, and particularly when Jatayu goes to attack Ravana, and Sita said, no, you are too old, and he's much stronger. So Jatayu is an example, because Ravana cuts off his wings and talons, Jatayu falls and dies, of an external failure in our service. Jatayu failed to stop Ravana, and he was killed. But when Ram and Lakshman return and they find the dying Jatayu, Jatayu was able to tell them that Ravana had taken Sita and taken her southward. And then Ram and Lakshman were so pleased with Jatayu, they performed his funeral rites as if he were their own father. So external failure and success in Krishna consciousness is not really the measure of whether or not Krishna is pleased, because Jatayu apparently failed. Ram and Lakshman then searched everywhere for Sita. They couldn't find her anywhere, and while they were searching, they were captured by Kabanda. When we used to do the drama of the Ramayana, we had this incredible costume for Kabanda. And Ram and Lakshman cut off Kabanda's arms, at which point the living being revealed that he was actually a deva who had been cursed to have that form. And so when Ram and Lakshman burned the demoniac body, then the Deva body again appeared and told them, if you want to find Sita, go to Shabari. Shabari was a great pure devotee and an ascetic who had told by her guru that Ram and Lakshman would visit her someday. So when her guru went back to Godhead, she remained to greet Ram and Lakshman. And every day she would clean her ashram, and every day she would make a path of flowers for Ram and Lakshman. And every day she would pick fruits to feed them. And many, many years she did this every day. In the same way, we should be preparing our room and our heart and our consciousness for the appearance of Krishna. And she had originally been a tribal woman, and even though she had become initiated and she was a devotee, she still had some tendency to do things the way she was brought up. And so after picking these fruits, to make sure that they were actually sweet, she would taste each one of them. So when Ram and Lakshman came, she gave them food that she had taken a bite out of each of them ahead of time. And she told Ram and Lakshman that they should make friends with Hanuman and Sugriva. And she told them where to go to Lake Pampa in order to find Hanuman and Sugriva. And then she gave up her body and went back to Godhead. So Ram and Lakshman followed her advice, and they went to Lake Pampa. There Hanuman met them in disguise and then took them to join Sugriva. Sugriva said, I am also in exile. He said, I am also in exile. My brother has exiled me unfairly and even taken my wife. And so they made a vow of friendship that Ram would restore Sugriva's kingdom and Sugriva's wife, and then Sugriva would restore Ram's kingdom and Ram's wife. So first, Ram fulfilled this promise by killing Vali. And he killed Vali in an unusual way, where Sugriva challenged him to a fight. And while they were fighting, Ram killed him from behind a tree. And this is not generally the way that a Kshatriya would kill, but Ram explained that because Bali was a criminal, he had to be executed in this way. So then Sugriva got his kingdom back, and when he got his kingdom back, he was so happy to get his kingdom back that he got involved in just partying. And so even after the rainy season, he forgot about his end of the promise. Just like sometimes we forget what we promised to Guru and Krishna. Sometimes we become bewildered. If even Sugriva can become bewildered, we should not be surprised that sometimes we become bewildered. Then Lakshman went and said, hey, what's going on here? And Sugriva comes to his senses and he said, we'll send out groups of monkeys in 4 directions, and one of them will find Sita. So Ram was convinced that Hanuman would find Sita, and so he gave Hanuman his ring. And he said, when you find Sita, you can, because Sita wouldn't know him. She hadn't met Hanuman in the Leela, of course, they're eternal associates. And he said, because she won't know you, you can show this ring. And again, interesting how Ram, he's the devotees of Ram, like Guha, Jatayu, the monkeys. That there's Ram particularly is merciful to all sorts of beings.
रघुपति के दासा राम लक्ष्मण जानकी जय बोलो हनुमान की.
So Hanuman's group goes south and reaches the shore. And there they're told by Jatayu's brother Sampati that Sita is on the other side of the ocean. So Hanuman jumps over the ocean. And in Lanka, he looks for Sita and finally finds her in the Ashok forest. There he makes himself very small and hides in a tree where he sees Ravana threatening Sita with death and the Rakshasas threatening her and her chastity to Ram. After Ravana leaves, he tells her the story of Ram and gives her Ram's ring and wins her trust. And tells her, I will tell Ram where you are and he will come to rescue you. So then Hanuman decides, well, this was my only mission, to find Sita and give her assurance. He thought, but let me do some reconnaissance. Let me do some spying too. So he devises a plan. He knocks down a lot of the trees in the Ashoka Grove. And then he's brought to Ravana's court, where he tells Ravana that Ram is going to come and rescue his wife. And Ravana decides to kill him. And Vibhishan, Ravana's brother, says, you cannot kill a messenger. At most, you can disfigure him. So Ravana decides to set Hanuman's tail on fire and drag him through the streets. And while Hanuman's tail's on fire and he's being dragged through the streets, he's doing his spy work. He's seeing where everything is in Lanka and burning down Lanka at the same time. Hanuman returns and the whole monkey army goes to find Sita. They also come to the shore of the ocean, but not being able to jump, Ram fasts for 3 days to ask the help of the ocean, who then says, if you build a bridge, I will enable it to float. And then we have, of course, the very famous bridge over the ocean, putting rocks on the ocean, which float and keep a bridge. So Ram is showing us, even though he's God, how he's fasting and doing austerities and taking the help of his devotees. So they cross the bridge into Lanka and the war begins. Of course, it's a very, very long story of this war, the fighting between, especially all of Ravana's sons who come one after another after another. And at one point, there's a snake weapon that is shot at Ram and Lakshman. So nowadays, we have mostly fire weapons. We do also have some sound weapons. And there are, of course, disease weapons, which are supposed to be illegal, and poison weapons. But we do employ fire and sound weapons. But in Vedic times, they had all different kinds of weapons. So they had a snake weapon. And to counteract the snake weapon, Garuda came and ate the snakes. Well, Ravana was getting pretty desperate. His sons were being killed. And, he was losing this battle. And instead of just saying, well, I guess Ram is actually the Supreme Lord and I should surrender, he keeps trying to oppose Ramchandra. So he has his giant brother, Kumbhakarna, awakened. Kumbhakarna would sleep most of the year, and he had him untimely awakened. And Kumbhakarna goes on the battlefield where he's stepping on the monkeys and eating the monkeys and really causing havoc. And then Ramchandra cuts off his arms and throws him in the ocean and kills him. Now, at this point, Ravana, that so many of his sons have died, and Kumbhakarna, this giant brother who was invincible, had died. At that point, you would think Ravana would surrender, but he doesn't. And he then thinks of another weapon, which is shot by Indrajit at Lakshman and makes Lakshman very ill. And then they are told by their doctor, by the Kabiraj, you can see here, that the cure would come from a mountain in the Himalayas. And they were pretty far. They were in Sri Lanka. So Hanuman, of course, he's able to fly, to jump to the Himalayas. And he looks at the mountain and he's like, I don't know what herb it is. Prabhupada said he wasn't that smart, but he was very strong. So he decided, I'll bring the mountain. And Hanuman carries the whole mountain back, which has the herbs that revive Lakshman. Lakshman later kills Indrajit with the help of Ravana's brother, Vibhishan. Now Ravana is basically alone. All of his brothers and sons, except for Vibhishan, have been killed by Ram and Lakshman. His army is decimated, but still he doesn't surrender. And so now we have the final battle between Ram and Lakshman. Again, I'm leaving out a lot of details. Ram is given the chariot of Indra because he was in exile. He wouldn't have had a chariot. And because Ravana comes out with a chariot. So Ram is also given its chariot, and they have this huge chariot battle. And finally, Ravana is defeated. The Bhagavatam mentions that when Ram then saw Sita, he was very happy. However, in the Ramayana, it's explained that Ram asked Sita to be tested by fire to show that all the months she was with Ravana, she was not compromised. And the Kurma Purana explains that before Ravana kidnapped Sita, Agni took her into his custody, and a duplicate Sita, who was a lady who wanted to marry Ram, had actually appeared. And this duplicate Sita had been in Lanka. And in this fire test, the duplicate Sita entered the fire, and the actual Sita came out of the fire. And we know that Ram asked Lakshman to start this fire, which was something that really bothered Lakshman. And he said, next incarnation, I'm going to be the older brother. Anyway, after this fire test, and Ram brought the monkeys back to life, he installed the pious brother of Ravana, Bibhishana, on the throne. And at this same time, coincidentally, the 14 years of their exile were over. So they took Ravana's flower airplane that Ravana had taken from Kuvera and returned to Ayodhya. So the Bhagavatam says that as the Lord sat on his airplane of flowers with women offering him prayers and reciters chanting about his characteristics, he appeared like the moon with the stars and planets. Ramachandra ki jai. Unfortunately, later on, when Sita was pregnant with twins, Ramachandra went as a spy in his own kingdom to see how everything was going, and he heard one washerman angry with his wife because his wife had stayed at another man's house and saying, I'm not like Ram, who's going to accept an unchaste wife. And so diametrically opposed to modern politicians who try to keep their position regardless of any scandal, even though there was no scandal, even just an idea of a scandal, Ram exiled his pregnant wife. She stayed with Valmiki, where she gave birth to Lava and Kusha, who eventually returned to Ayodhya. Each of the other three brothers also had 2 sons and established an ongoing kingdom. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama. So I also have a little something that I hope you will like. And so some of you may be familiar with Handel's Messiah. So I always thought that the chorus of the Messiah would be perfect for Ram Leela, Lord of Lords and King of Kings. So I put together this little amateurish video with Handel's Messiah and Lord Ramachandra.